It's been said that managers do things right, while leaders do the right things. If this is true, then the ability to delegate the right things to the right people has to be one of the most critical skills of leadership. To help us take the 7 steps to effective delegation, we'll hear today from Bob Johnson. Bob Johnson has trained thousands of managers on 5 continents. When he shares management techniques and strategies, you know he's not speaking from theory, but from practice. He's been there. Listen as Bob Johnson explains the 7 steps to effective delegation.
7 steps to effective delegation. How do leaders build champions through effective delegation? Well, that's what the purpose of this session is all about. To sharpen our skills in effective delegation, resulting in more committed, loyal, and results-producing team members. Talking about this business of delegation, I have to share with you the story of a very powerful military leader who was to address a group of sergeants on how do you get something done. And he came in, and there's some 50, 60 young sergeants in front of this powerful military leader, and he waxed eloquently. He spoke eloquently for over an hour on the process of getting things done. He then gave the sergeants an assignment. He gave them an hour to complete it, and the assignment was very simple. He said, "Gentlemen, you have laying outside in the yard a pole 30 feet long. The pole is about 20 to 25 inches in diameter. You have a hole that is 6 feet deep. Would you please in the next hour outline the process by which you would get the pole into the hole? You have 1 hour to complete the assignment." And the general stood and he watched him for a moment. He noticed that one of the sergeants grabbed his pen, wrote out about that long, 1 sentence, turned his paper upside down, put his pen down, and sat back and took a nap for the rest of the hour. Everybody else was working diligently. They had slide rules out, and they had their little pocket computers out. They had everything going. They worked and worked and worked and worked. Finally, the hour was up, and the general knew who he was going to call on first. And he said, "Now, gentlemen, I've watched and everyone has worked diligently for an hour on this project, but I noticed that we have one very smart, bright person in the room," and he kept looking at this guy, "who has got the perfect answer, because he finished the assignment in about 7 seconds. And he looked at the sergeant and he said, "Would you please stand, sir, and read out loud so all of us can learn from your wisdom the process by which you would complete the task." The sergeant stood, picked up his pad, and read, "Private, put that pole in that hole." Why get bogged down with process if you've got a focus on the end result? You know, keeping everyone on the team totally focused on the end result is critically important to achieving our goals and our objectives. Many years ago, during the Spanish-American conflict, the then President McKinley of the United States needed desperately to get a message to a gentleman by the name of Garcia. No one knew where he was except that he was somewhere in Cuba. How to get the message to him became the big problem. And one of President McKinley's assistants said, "If there is anyone who can get the message to Garcia, it's a man by the name of James Rowan." James Rowan was summoned. He met with the president and was told he needed to get the letter to Garcia. Now, the story about how James Rowan sealed the letter in an oilskin pouch, strapped it to its chest, landed by night on the shores of Cuba, and traversed his way through the jungles and found Garcia, and in fact delivered the message, is not the point of the story. The point of the story is the fact that James Rowan did not ask, "Well, where is he? How do you spell it? Are you sure that he's the person I need to give it to?" Etc., etc. He simply took the message, said, yes, I will deliver it, and then did. How can you and I build a team of people who are that focused on getting the message to Garcia, that focused on moving you and your organization toward the attainment of your goal for this year? That's the critical issue of the story. How do you delegate and get things done in a simple, easy, powerful way and build trust and commitment and confidence in your people? We're going to look at a simple 7-step formula for doing that. Before we look at that formula, let's look at a definition, a working definition for what exactly is delegation. Would you take 60 seconds and jot down, please, your best definition? What is delegation? Define it, please. All right, thank you. Thank you. Someone, please, share with me. What have you written? How have you defined this word delegation? Someone?
Giving responsibilities to others.
Giving responsibilities to others. Think with me there for just a moment. Can we give the responsibility away to someone else? Who's ultimately accountable? We are. We can grant them, right? We can entrust them with a responsibility. We cannot give it away. Does that make sense to you? Now you say, wait a minute, Bob, you're being word picky. Well, let's see how we go. Someone else, tell me what you've written, please. Yes.
Distributing a task to another.
Distributing a task to another. Ladies and gentlemen, key question. Do we delegate by task to be performed or results to be achieved?
Results.
Okay. Now, we'll talk more and see in our 7-step formula, how do we go about doing that? I've asked a lot of executives this question over a number of years, and we've come up with and compiled what I believe to be a very powerful yet simple definition of delegation. Delegation is the work a manager does to entrust responsibility, grant authority, and create accountability for results. The work a manager does to entrust responsibility, grant authority, and create accountability for results. Let's talk for just a brief moment about that last part of the definition, create accountability for results. Will team members from time to time on account day, and the rock of accountability comes down, it's account day, will team members from time to time do everything within their power to wiggle out from underneath the rock of accountability? Will they do that? And they do it in all sorts of ways, and we as managers often will let them get away with it. No more. In our 7-step formula that we're going to put in place, we will firmly affix accountability at the point of effective delegating it to the person that we're talking with. So what's this process all about? What do we do? Well, step number 1 in the process is it begins with us sitting down and thinking carefully and planning how we will sell the person on what's in it for them. In other words, if you're getting ready to delegate to someone a special project, what's in it for them? How do they win by successfully bringing this project home? Does it help them in their career path, in their growth, in their preparation for a future position? We need, before calling the person in and beginning the actual process, our first step is to sit, think, and plan what's in it for them. And if we can stop and think what's in it for that person, it enables us to empower them as we get into the actual process. Step 2, when you call the person in and you sit and begin the conversation, you must clearly define the results to be achieved. Do not, I beg you, please, ladies and gentlemen, do not start in telling them how to do the job. Maintain a focus on the end result. Paint them a picture of, once this project has been successfully completed, what it looks like, what does it sound like, what does it smell like, and how does everyone win. Once you've done that, and you've got clarity on the end result, the third thing you do is you must clearly define the rules and limits within which they must operate in order to bring this project home. As an example, you may spend up to a maximum of X amount of money. Let's say that, for the sake of an example, that they can spend up to X amount of money, and you say to them that you have total authority to spend that much money in total, and you may sign off on any single expenditure up to B amount of money. If it goes over B amount, you come to me because I want to sign off on that with you. But from 0 up to B, any money that has to be invested, you can invest. But you may not exceed X, etc. Am I clear? You must clearly define the rules and limits, make sure they're understood. You need to also have a discussion with the person to whom you're delegating what the performance standards are going to be. Now, performance standards are nothing more than a few statements which define the conditions which will exist when the special project has been completed satisfactorily. It is a set of conditions which are written in specific and measurable language. You need to discuss those performance standards with the person to whom you're delegating. Step 5, you ask them for a plan of action. You say, wait a minute, Bob, hold it. Time out here. You mean you want me to ask them to bring me a plan? I'm the manager. I'm just going to tell them how to do it. Now, ladies and gentlemen, key question. Will you work harder to make your plan work, or will you work harder to make somebody else's plan work? Oh, you'll work harder to make your own plan work. Is that correct? Suppose I'm talking with George, and I've sat and I've talked with George about how he wins, and I've explained to him the results that we're after. We've talked about the rules and limits, and we've looked at the performance standards. And I say, George, this is Wednesday. Would you please give it some thought between now and Friday mid-morning? You and I will sit down Friday mid-morning and have a coffee together and go over the plan that you've put together to make this strategy work. So George says, fine. What have you just done for George's confidence when you, the boss, say, George, I trust and believe in you enough that you can effectively plan how to bring this strategy home? Does he feel better as he walks away? Sure he does. Now then, Friday morning, and George walks in. And he says to you, boss, I've worked out a 5-step plan, and I think what we need to do is A, B, C, D, and E. Now, you know, because of your previous experience doing that job, that if he does A, that's good. If he does B, that's good. But if he does C, he's going to run this project over in a ditch and kill it. So what should you do? Should you look at him and say, George, you can't do C, that's totally wrong. I expected more of that out of you, and that is that what you should do? No. No. Why not ask George? George, let's talk about C for a minute. Why have you decided to do that step? And George says, because of this and this and this and that. Now, George hasn't the experience that you have. He doesn't know that he's about to run it in the ditch and cause real problems for the sales department if he does that step. So you don't need to tell him, you just need to ask him, well, George, in doing step C, what impact do you think it'll have on our team in making that happen? Oh, it'll be good, it'll do this and this and this. He says, fine. George, how will that impact the guys over in the sales department? And he says, well, I hadn't thought about that. So George now sees that if he does this, he's causing a problem over there. At that point, we then can offer a helpful suggestion, such as, George, have you considered trying this approach? or that approach? How do you think that might work? You see, I'm asking. I'm not telling. I'm letting George tell me. How does George feel? Keep in mind something, managers. When you recruit and hire a person onto your team, you are buying more than their hands and their back. You're buying their brain as well. And if we stop telling and start asking more, we can develop and tap that knowledge and that ability that they have and bring to the job. So the fifth thing we do is we ask them for a plan of action. Now let's look at step 6 in our process. How are you going to implement the plan? When you've delegated to George to begin with, why not ask George to include his ideas on how to implement this plan when he brings you his plan of action on Friday morning? You at this point can begin to sit and think creatively with George on how you can get this project off the ground and give it a fast running start, offer helpful suggestions and ideas, and brainstorm with George. Kind of let each other's freewheeling, brainstorming, thinking feed off each other for a moment in terms of how can you launch this project and give it the best supercharged start you possibly can. And finally, step number 7. You must have thought through, managers, how you're going to follow it up and follow it through. Follow it up, follow it through. Inspect what you expect. How are you going to stay in touch with George as he begins moving toward achieving this project and bringing it home successfully? Follow it up, follow it through. If you do not inspect what you expect, then don't expect what you expect. Let's do a simple review of those 7 key points again. Step 1, you begin by planning how you will sell the person on how they win. 2, you delegate by results to be achieved rather than tasks to be performed. 3, the rules and limits are clearly defined. Step 4, you agree on the performance standards. Step 5, you ask for a plan of action. Step 6, you talk through and plan how you will implement the plan. And step 7, you follow it up, you follow it through, and control positively the results that you're looking to achieve. If you will follow that simple 7-step formula against the backdrop of some simple principles, I think you will be delighted. Let's look at some of those principles. When you call Rosemary in and you're talking to Rosemary and you're going to delegate a project to her, begin it on a positive note. Rosemary, you've been called in because you've been with the company now for over 2 years, and based on your previous performance and the track record that you've turned in, you've been selected to take on a very special project for our department. How's Rosemary feel? She feels pretty good, doesn't she? It starts positively. 2, you discuss the results with Rosemary. Make sure she's clear on where you're headed with it. 3, make sure that you grant to Rosemary sufficient authority to get the job done, because managers, if we don't do that, Rosemary then has to constantly come back to us for our approval on everything, and we don't have time to do what we need to be doing. 4, the objectives are discussed and agreed. 5, the control system that you're going to implement to track it is fair. And Rosemary's been involved in the design of that control system and how it will be tracked. Step 6, the rules and limits are clear and understood. 7, the receiver sees it as a forward step for her in her career. How do they win? It goes back to our planning in the beginning in the first step of the 7-step formula. 8, the receiver knows that help is available. And principle number 9, the manager must know the skills and abilities of his or her people. When you accept a management responsibility, you're asked to accomplish a great deal. Is that true? You're asked to accomplish something far greater than you. If I let the inner circle represent all that you individually, by yourself, can do as a manager, And I let the outer circle represent the results that you're being held responsible for and accountable for. It's bigger than you can accomplish by yourself. So what do you do through this business of effective delegation? You extend yourself through others. You empower them. You build their confidence, you build their trust, and you build their commitment. And you build your department, your region, your company, and make it bigger.